Local stories, local people. We're taking you inside Western Mass news. It's the Even Better Western Mass podcast with Dave Madsen.
Welcome to this week's edition of the Even Better Western Mass podcast. Mid-November, wherever you are, hope you're doing very well. We're 2 weeks past the election now. Joe Biden unofficially the president-elect, and, everything continues to play out in Washington, D.C. As a matter of fact, that is the subject of this week's Even Better Western Mass podcast. My guest is political consultant Tony Cignoli. Tony back for a second visit. Of course, Tony and I talk about the results of the election, the fact that the Trump administration, President Trump, is not conceding defeat, what we can expect in the days, weeks, and months ahead as far as Joe Biden becoming president, what we might expect from the administration itself, and who he may pick for his cabinet, and the impact that could have on the Massachusetts congressional delegation and on the Senate itself. Tony Cignoli, my guest this week on the Even Better Western Mass podcast. Tony, good to see you again, and thanks for, this is the second time on the Even Better Western Mass podcast. Good to have you with us again.
Thank you very much, Dave. I appreciate it.
You know, it's really too bad there's nothing to talk about. Let's start with last Tuesday and the fact that we learned on Saturday that Joe Biden, at least unofficially, is the next president of the United States. Were you surprised by the results?
In some ways, to see that large of a turnout on both sides, that both Trump got the vote that he did, which was record-breaking, and then that Biden got the vote that he did, which certainly was the ultimate breaking of a record. That was amazing. I think a lot of us expected a significant vote because of what was on the table. You know, the pandemic, the economy, all the other issues that America faces right now. But to see that kind of a turnout was certainly amazing. One thing that I had said in looking at the numbers right after, Dave, and we're wonkish. We tear into the precincts, the counties, what happened, why, what flipped, what didn't, what matched up with polling, or at least was in line with polling. And one thing that we clearly saw is that certainly a lot of the early voters were probably there for Joe Biden when they came out early. Voter identification, GOTV done by the Democratic side, superior this time around to the Republicans. And even social media, that aspect that was done so well by Trump and his team in 2016, which was almost their entire campaign, they got bested there as well by the Biden team. But where it came close, where it didn't pull coattails, the Biden victory, for folks looking at the United States Senate who looked like they had a real opportunity, was that the disconnect came with undecideds and independents who were afraid of some of what they were hearing would happen if Joe Biden became president. And as off the wall as some of it may sound, but the claims of socialism, communism in some parts of the country that played. It reminded me, Dave, something Joe Napolitan always used to drill into our heads. Politics is perception, not reality. And I remember Ed Kennedy saying that to me all the time from Joe, always that line, you know? I'm sure you probably heard it back at the station in the day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That it was a reality check with us, and it's and the fact to this day, and I mean that was really the right up until the polls closed on election day. That was the theme that Trump was using, this fear.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that the strongest things that move and motivate voters are that which frightens them, which might affect their pocketbook, affect their family, and some of the greatest fear that they would have right now, heightened sense of fear in America, certainly because of the pandemic, is there. The politics of fear is a powerful thing. Sometimes it's done with a degree of class, like Ronald Reagan did. There's a bear in the woods. Remember those incredible commercials of Ronald Reagan's in 1980? And the bear, of course, was Russia. It was a different kind of campaigning, a different kind of a negative ad that really wasn't negative. It was factual in its basis. That's the other thing, Dave, right now that's I should say mind-boggling, but I guess it is. That just stuns me in the profession that I'm in. We get to see so much media and so many of the ads and the placements that maybe not everyone else in Western Mass might see. We're seeing what's happening in Nevada and Florida, et cetera. And to see how many political action committees were out there this time with their own agenda, whether it be pro-Trump, pro-Biden, or pro-something that they think would happen because of Biden being elected or Trump staying. The money that was spent in this presidential is incomprehensible. We won't know anything close to what the real numbers are, maybe till January, February, March, when those final audits are done and the final reports are done. But Dave, there's one other piece. Most people won't look into what did that political action committee, what did Joe's lollipop political action committee do in this campaign? folks will look at the Koch brothers and they'll look at some of the other large players, American Families, Gun Owners Action League, etc. But there was so much money poured into this thing that there was more than just Biden versus Trump going on, and more than just Collins versus Gideon, for example, in Maine.
Yeah.
You had so many other players involved. The money, just incomprehensible.
And I think about that too, that the fact that everything seemed to have played out as it was predicted to play out, especially on election night, that in the early voting that Trump would be the one in the lead, but as the mail-in voting and everything ballots came in, it would shift towards Biden, and that's exactly what's played out.
On the polling side of it, it's become such a science. I had a great opportunity this past weekend to do a symposium for Suffolk University, and David Paleologos, the pollster, was involved. And certainly a great pollster with a phenomenal track record, not only for Suffolk, the Boston Globe, for other major campaigns. And that was one thing that he was able to make the case for. We as pollsters overall may not have gotten everything exact, certainly not the United States Senate, but we could see as things were going along, our polling was on target as to when was being done. That's something that a lot of people miss too, not so much in the media, but the general public. A poll result today is from a poll that was finished and completed 2, 3, 4 days ago, maybe, that ran over the course of time. Dave, that's the other thing that's changed. In this new modern politics, every 10 seconds, there's a new message, a new TV ad, a new Facebook ad, a new direct email that comes to you, something on Twitter, then bang, there's something on Instagram. It's incomprehensible what the American electorate is bombarded with, even more so than any other nation on the planet right now. Any campaign we see anywhere else, there's nothing like the U.S.
And it's something I know we saw some of it in 2016, but it really went full bore in 2020, where all this was out there.
Very much so. You can look at 2008, Barack Obama's first campaign, as the first real use in a scientific kind of way of data mining, sending people messages that are in keeping with what they already like. Here, I'm going to send this particular message to this person because they drive a Ford F-150, they get Popular Mechanics magazine, gosh, they live in a brick house, and they're a member of the Fisher Persons Club or something like that. You're able to do that kind of data mining. And in 2008, we saw that done so well by Barack Obama. We then saw it taken to a very different level in 2016, the kind of level that the Trump campaign was able to utilize so as to get past the fact they didn't have the kind of ground troops that Hillary Clinton did. They out-air warred her in a million different ways in air that had not been fought in the past.
The other thing, I think I want to take a step back when we were talking about these PACs and everything else. The fact that what we see in Massachusetts seems to be different than the rest of the country, because obviously Democrats win very heavily in Massachusetts. So we may not see all of that other parts of the country are seeing. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely so. Very, very different ads. In fact, some of the Biden and Trump ads in different parts of America, neither campaign would waste the money of spending. You wouldn't spend the money in Massachusetts. You assume that Joe Biden's going to win in Massachusetts. On the other hand, you still have to campaign Massachusetts. And as you know, sometimes you've got to buy Boston media to be able to reach correctly into Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, to make up the streeters that may not be there in those states. And also, you're tracking specific certain voters, that voter in Concord, in Nashua, who is tuned into what's happening in Boston. So you've got to buy that market. So certainly we see some of those national ads. And of course we did on cable, because some of the cable national buy stuff was there. That was the big stuff. But then you had very much more, I hate to use this analogy, but it's the best one I can come up with. You saw both campaigns, instead of using a shotgun to go hunting, they basically had a sniper's rifle with the scope on it, and you're looking for a specific target, not a scattering target. And we saw that. What plays in Peoria doesn't always play in Boston or Chicago or in Tallahassee or in Los Angeles.
Let's talk about where we are right now. I'm not, and just as the casual viewer, surprised by what we're seeing from the Trump White House right now, refusing to concede the election. Is this something we should be afraid of? Perhaps,
because there are a set of laws in place as to how transitions happen. And certainly the battle of 1876 for the presidency, Tilden versus Hayes, was raucous, and it's the one that people are talking about, making the comparison to. You've got to be real wonk to even know what that was all about. I think what we're seeing right now is not even close to 2000, where in 2000, you had the Clinton White House basically deciding, okay, we're not sure on this. And this is a toss-up. It's tight. It's that close. It's just 10,000, some 18,000 votes. What's real here? What's not? And it's one state. And so they held on opening the doors to George W. Bush for transition until the moment the Supreme Court said, done. At that exact moment, the GSA, the Clinton White House opened the doors. It has to be done. To better answer your question, I've been talking to folks who are a lot smarter than I am on the governmental side of things, those in law enforcement that are at the higher level, the Fed, and also to diplomats, folks who have been in the United States Ambassador Corps. They're terrified of this. They're terrified of what this says to other nations. In other nations, if they're not watching our media specifically, what they're getting from their own media is, wow, wait a second, that sounds just like Tajikistan. That sounds almost like, the battle for presidency of Afghanistan when it was first, run, the first campaign. Oh my goodness, this sounds like some third world nation where one entity is holding on to power, and not letting go. What happens next? Is it like in other nations and other places over the course of decades where, it's a Pinochet kind of a situation and there's tanks in the street? Is this Venezuela? Is this Peru? It's not. There's enough in place to make this go the right way. The problem right now is that there is a Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, who's refusing to acknowledge transition. The GSA hasn't moved forward in this regard. The administration has not yet. And one last piece that's really scary here, and that's that, the aspect of the clock ticking and what this says to our adversaries. What an amazingly dangerous time this would be. What a unique, terrible time if something were to happen, if the United States were to come under attack, domestically or foreign. If there were some major activity right now in China, in the Middle East, who's in place to do what needs to be done? Even right now, what's the status of the Defense Department with the Secretary of Defense gone? And how many interim secretaries do we have in the first place, leading up to Mike Esper? So forgive me for that rambling. I'm trying not to sound a panic alarm or whatnot, but folks a lot smarter than me, who normally, we would all be saying, oh, this is no big deal. This will be over in a week or 2 weeks or whatever. There's no real grounds for contention. Judges left and right are saying no to what's being brought forth by Trump's attorneys. But gosh golly gee whiz, it's almost as if the administration and certain Republican senators are looking past that and saying, we don't care. We just don't care. The U.S. Senator from Wisconsin, the U.S. Senator from Kentucky, Mitch McConnell, at some point you would expect them to have their Barry Goldwater moment with Richard Nixon and walk down the hall and say, listen, for the good of the nation, the good of the country, gosh, and this isn't like your high crime situation. You've lost the election. Dave, there's no way to, even in a recount, for Trump to make up the difference here, So again, forgive that rambling answer, but yeah, there's some real concern out there, and folks smarter than me are elaborating on that, I think, right now.
Now we're taping this. It's a Tuesday past Election Day, and I was listening to Joe Biden this afternoon on CNN, and he's still sounding very presidential and not pushing the panic button, and just saying the fact that he can continue, Trump can continue doing this, but he's the one who's when you look at his legacy, he's tainting his own legacy.
Well said, very much so. I think it's one of the unique things about Joe Biden. He's been at this a long time. He's lost this twice. He's been vice president for 8 years. He knows how this works, what has to be done. He also knows what's at stake. And for him, there's a 4-year term. There's probably not a term after this. He won't be running for re-election. This is legacy, but it's also, what do I really do to leave a legacy that people will look back at and say, this is the template for how a president acts at a moment like this. Hence, I think the immediacy of moving as quickly as he did on the coronavirus panel that he put together. He had been indicating that would be job one during the campaign, and it was, without even his hand being on the Bible yet. Already talking about a summit amongst America's allies, which has been extremely well received by all the NATO countries. Just the mere fact that he's saying, COVID or no COVID, this spring, let us come together. Let us sit at a long table if necessary, and let us talk about what we need to make up for time lost. So Biden knows what to do. He has enough people around him, I think, too, who can help him to do what he wants to. And then you've got those folks in government, Republican or Democrat, who are committed to their careers in the FBI, in the Department of Justice, in the CIA, in the NSA. These folks are more than often patriots and Americans first and foremost than anything else. They're not partisan players.
So more than anything else, you think we just have to get through this, and somewhere along the way, Trump he may not necessarily concede, but give up the fact that, yes, I lost.
I think that will be inevitable,
Yeah.
even if, at some point all the court challenges are shot down or not. This never gets to the Supreme Court. We all, I think, understand that now. The president calling upon the Supreme Court to respond, that's not there. Other issues will now start to take precedence. The roaring numbers of yesterday and today's stock market, the Pfizer announcement, the hope that comes with all of that, the fact that the United States Senate, that balance could shift in January based on what happens January 5th in Georgia. That's where I think the political energy is going to be focused towards. As far as Donald Trump is concerned, Donald Trump will have to leave. He will leave. But I think the Trumpism will live on. And that's where some of these Republican senators are terrified to take him on, other than folks like Mitt Romney. Anyone watching the Sunday news programs, it was pretty obvious, I think, what was going on there. By the 17th time I had seen Mitt Romney somewhere in America over the course of 48 hours, it's pretty clear. He's looking at the next time around. He's thinking, time to rebuild party, and this may be an opportunity. He's also probably looking at Joe Biden as somebody who's run twice and lost, got it again. Why not take a shot? Same as Ronald Reagan had done. Watch Romney in that regard. And I think that's why you heard what we did from Mitt Romney. A degree of sanity, a degree of, Mr. President, you're going to have to go. But you know what? Mitt Romney, I'm going to stand by my conservative principles. And that, I'm saying, yeah, Joe Biden, you're the president of the United States, but it doesn't mean I'm going to lay down what I believe. I'll fight with you. I'll work with you. That's what I think we need to hear an awful lot more from right now, Dave, in the House, in the Senate, across the board, even governors. I'll work with you.
Tony, one of the things when you're talking about the reaction around the world, I mean, is what's happening now feeding the narrative that American democracy is no longer legitimate?
Wow. Wow, Dave. There's fears when you look at what the BBC reports in the last week or so. Italian media, we keep an eye on, some South American, in nations that are hostile towards the United States. Certainly what you said is exactly on target. When you look at Radio Moscow television, that is exactly what's coming across right now. If you're Vladimir Putin, you love this. You're able to say, see, I told you, it's not better over there. Look at the mess that they've got going on. Yeah. And it's not just us that have these weird elections or these illegitimate elections. Look what's happening, because the president of the United States is burrowing in and fighting this fight. In a lot of South American countries, Venezuela, others and whatnot, they look at this and they see this in their own nations. They've never seen this before, though, from the United States of America. 2000, battle between Gore and Bush was not quite this. Yeah. 1876 certainly was horrific. But you got to almost look back to 1800. And you got to hope that the ghost of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams visits Donald Trump tonight at the White House. As raucous as the elections were in 1800, as bad as it was horrific. There were all kinds of plots, from assassination to overthrows to how do you just completely blow up the election. When all was said and done, Jefferson had won, and Adams and Jefferson came together. And it was Jefferson who stood up and said, we've got to go about this the right way. I'll call on him now and then. And then it was Adams who stood up, who said, my goodness gracious, there was militia activity being threatened, and it was on his side for him. And he actually stood up and said, that cannot be. The nation is larger than this. We are greater than this. And you saw these two incredible leaders lead. So hopefully those two ghosts might visit Donald Trump and give him a little bit of indication. Exit. Hey, there could be life after this for Donald Trump. Certainly, there could be another run for the presidency. I don't think that's going to be the game. I think there's a lot of money to be made if you're Donald Trump. There's the books, there's your own TV, your own radio, and I think he's thinking that way. And no deference or ill thoughts for Rush Limbaugh, but certainly his health is not good. His time seems to be at hand. Who fills that void? Maybe it's Donald Trump. There's a million things. And at some point, I think if somebody just lays out the deal for him, maybe he looks at that and says, wow, there's an avenue and a place to go. But Trumpism will live on. You will see people running and seeking his endorsement. That's the other thing, Dave. He got 70 million votes. 70 million people bought this this argument of what government should be or not be. 70 million people were concerned enough about a Democrat as president. That's legitimate. That's got to be addressed. And to Biden's credit, I think he has done that. In the speech that he made on the evening that he passed the 270, and consistently, he's talking about what do I do. So hopefully we may even see with Joe Biden, him taking a page out of Lincoln's book, that team of rivals kind of an aspect. Who do we see from the Republican Party coming into the administration? Who do we see advising, not necessarily being a member of the cabinet, who are Republicans?
Yeah, the other thing you mentioned, the January 5th runoff election in Georgia, the importance of that, and the fact that the role that could play in all of this, and of course the power in the Senate too. But do you think a lot of what's happening right now is focused on that and the fact that Republicans know they have to win that?
Very much so. That's why you've got 2 U.S. Republican senators in Georgia seeking the removal of the Republican Secretary of State.
Yeah.
There's no legal grounds. The courts have already ruled there's nothing there. The lieutenant governor and others in Georgia have come forward and said, there's nothing there. It makes no sense. You can't remove him. And there's another election on January 5th. You can't remove the fellow who's in charge of the elections and who just produced an election that seemed to have been flawless. So a lot of this is shenanigans. A lot of this is games. A lot of this is pulling any card you can, any move in what has become a game of inches. There was a time when you won races by touchdowns. Arguably, if you take a look at the number, the distance right now between Biden and Trump, there's a couple touchdowns in there for that, especially given how close our elections have been for the last 30, 40 years. But right now, there's this game of inches, death by 1,000 cuts until somebody just says, the heck with it, it's not worth it. I'm seeing that too often in politics these days. How much focus on Georgia? A heck of a lot, but a lot of focus on a lot of other things too. Let's watch what the United States Supreme Court has to say in a few days about the ACA, about Obamacare. Signals from the court today were intriguing, especially from Justice Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts, who stepped in last time and said, but now it's Neil Gorsuch, who's also seems to be telegraphing, hang on, wait a second. Based on the matter of law, what's being brought before us, I don't think we're throwing this whole thing out. That will be an amazing battle for Republicans in the Senate, should they decide to take that up. But I think there's going to be other enticements, Dave. I think you're going to see Democrats and Republicans talk about infrastructure package, a huge infrastructure package. Democrats like Richie Neal, who are able to talk to Republicans, and who Republicans in the House do respect. They like Neal as chairman of Ways. Well, I won't say they like him as chairman of Ways and Means. He's a Democrat, but they like him because there's a lot of sound reasoning that comes along with Richie Neal, and he's had relationships with them. He's worked with them when they were in power, and vice versa, to get things done. A large infrastructure package, a large infrastructure deal that does something for the majority of the 50 states, that builds bridges, that puts construction players to work, construction companies who may be fundraisers for certain senators, certain governors. That's how the game works.
Yeah.
And that puts people back to work at the same time. I think you're going to see a push in that direction and past the silliness of the politics that's been so far.
Do you think, you mentioned the Supreme Court, there's been some talk about the Biden administration doing something to return some kind of a balance to the Supreme Court. My guess is that that's not going to happen right away, but is this something you'd see during the administration?
I think from what I know of Joe Biden, and people like Bob Markle, the former mayor of Springfield, know him a heck of a lot better than I do, childhood friends till now. Bob was featured in the CNN biography on Joe Biden. And a few other folks. A guy named Larry Rask, who was very close to, one of Biden's closest advisors. Just thinking of the kind of advice Larry would have given him. Larry passed a few months ago from COVID, amazing. Otherwise, I think he would have been one of the people shouting the loudest the other night, for Biden, after having been with him from the first Senate campaign. But to the point of your question, forgive me, I don't see Joe Biden doing that. He is a political scientist. He's a political historian. It makes no sense. That's like Hillary Clinton showing up on day one saying, I'm going to completely fix and change and do all kinds of things to healthcare in America. You're kidding, really. That was not the right war at that moment. That was not the battle. The Democrats, Joe Biden, they don't have the bandwidth to go into that. What they've got the bandwidth to do is exactly what they're doing right now. It's COVID, COVID, COVID. because that's economy, economy, economy. Those are the key things right off the bat. And then it comes to the other issues that are so important. Not something like, do we go into a massive battle? Do we further divide the nation? Look how divisive the nation has been right now. Yeah. When you get this out there, hey, they're going to stack the court. They're going to do this, that, or the other thing to the court. And this will affect third rail issues, abortion, gun rights, etc. That will really make people crazy. Talk about militias, holy smokes. Biden's smart. I don't think he goes anywhere near that. I think he's happy to go for legacy. I think he's happy to fix things, correct things, and set things in a path that he thinks is good for America. And he realizes he doesn't have a heck of a lot of time to do this. Congressional, midterm elections are just 2 years away. Dave, I've been in 2 conversations in the last 8 hours about those elections already with 2 folks that want to run for the United States Senate. You're kidding me. I mean, we just got through this. The week isn't completed yet. We haven't gotten until midnight yet on this Tuesday since last Tuesday's election, and already that's the kind of conversations that get wild.
Do you think, touching on that, as far as Joe Biden, is the country going to give him 2 years to straighten things around? And if we don't get satisfaction within 2 years, we could see another shift back to the Republicans in Congress?
Certainly, that happens enough. There's always that yin and yang, the pendulum that goes back and forth. But I think Biden understands that he doesn't have 2 years. He's got about 2 minutes to figure most of the stuff out. That's why you're seeing the transition team on his end actually acting and working as if they're having conversations with the Trump administration, having conversations being put together by the GSA, by the State Department. There are enough players around willing to help. There are former United States secretaries of state, and I won't get people crazy by saying Hillary Clinton would be one of them, but John Kerry, who we hadn't seen or heard a lot from until maybe a couple of weeks ago. Wow, someone like that. Madeleine Albright, but there are Republicans as well. Secretary of Defense Cohen, others, etc. Key players out there who are offering help, I think, right now. They're not looking for jobs. They've got their pensions. They've done their times. And I think what a lot of them are thinking right now is, what can I do to be helpful as an outside advisor, as an ombudsman, as a emissary, even if necessary, in a place where they may have some wherewithal, whether it be the Middle East or wherever. You're seeing a lot of that right now. You mentioned before we started this program, we were talking about something that you and I have not seen in an election. We've seen celebratory, election nights. We've seen Barack Obama walk into a stadium packed with tens of thousands of people. We've seen that, but we haven't seen this. People pouring out into the streets. They want massive change. And as long as they stay involved, and as long as there are independents and unenrolled, and even Republicans who may have voted for Joe Biden or who were just afraid of where things were going, as long as they keep making a noise, as long as they keep pressing, that can make a difference. And a lot of it is local, Dave. One other thing, too, is we think about local. What else happened in 2020? The census. Mm-hmm. If you look at it's the state legislatures that make up the congressional lines, that make up which member of Congress retains the district they may be in. And certainly, when the census is done and put together, those state legislatures take a look at this. The majority of the state legislatures in the United States of America are Republican controlled right now. So, that's the kind of thing that maybe really smart folks start to focus on, realizing that change has to happen in state legislatures as well. And that can be electing Republicans who just do the right thing when it comes time to reconfigure congressional districts.
Again, that brings up the fact that here in Massachusetts, we're out of touch with that because it's been so heavily Democratic for so many years.
Very much so. Very, very much so. And, you look at right now in Massachusetts, I was in a conversation earlier this morning that was really an eye-opener for me. There's so much work that has not been done by the Massachusetts legislature, House and Senate, because of COVID, frankly, not being able to hold public hearings to the degree that they had in the past, having to rely on Zooms, et cetera. But to cut to the chase of that, there are 9 major bills, maybe 12, that they need to take up, impacting everything from the environment to infrastructure to our literally the finance of the Commonwealth. It sounds like we'll be okay in FY21, but unless there's change, some new way of dealing with COVID and the economic impacts of it, FY22 is terrifying. And that's not in 2022, that's next June, next July.
Yeah.
To that point too, we talk about change. Dave, the dean of the state Senate right now, this side of the 508, from the 508 West, the dean of the Massachusetts Senate is Eric Lesser. I think he's 31 years old. I think he's been in office for 6 years come this January. How fast that's, remember back in the day, 20, 30 years, Tony Cignoli, the dean for the longest time, chairman of Ways and Means, etc. It took a long time to move up. That's changed now too. And you look at that, and that's another thing for us. Forgive me for taking the question and running away in a different direction with it. But what matters to us here in Western Massachusetts, we never really fully recovered from the 2008 recession. And you know the drill. You know, we both live in Western Massachusetts. We hear it all the time. We're always forgotten by Boston. Gosh golly gee whiz, we're always on the short end of the stick. So right now, we need more than ever before is those legislators that represent us to go down there kicking, screaming, and making a lot of noise, because we can't afford at the end of this economic horrific downturn, at the end of this pandemic, to have the same slow response economically that we had in 2008. That it will just not be a good thing for Pittsfield or Springfield or Holyoke, Chicopee, etc.
Now, you touched on that, and actually it was one of the things I mentioned on election night too, the fact that in the last 4 years, actually the last 2 years, we've seen a lot of turnover in the Western Mass delegation to Boston. Hampshire County, a complete turnover, and I think we've got 4 new state reps heading down to Boston, and I think 1 new senator too. So, as you said, we don't have we don't have the longevity in there anymore that we had for so many years.
Yeah, very well said. And again, I can remember when I first got started as an aide, it was an amazing array of legislators. You had Bill Mullens, the Bill Mullens, who the Mullens Center is named for. Bill Mullens, who took on a corrupt House of Representatives, helped completely turn things around, oust a House Speaker, bring in Speaker Kavarian, and then for the briefest of moments, Bill Mullens was the chairman of Ways and Means. What that could have meant to Western Massachusetts. Then, as we know, Bill got sick, and I think it was between January when he was sworn in and sometime in March that same year that he passed. Other names then, Iris Holland, a Republican, when there were at least a few more Republicans in the House, who was revered. When Iris spoke, it was like E.F. Hutton. Everybody stopped because you knew whatever she came out with, even if it was partisan, she had done her homework. Yeah. Tony Cignoli, incomprehensible. And I would say it with great respect to him, a guy who was proud to say, never graduated high school, yet to become the chairman of Ways and Means at one point. So many other names like that. Lemansky, Walsh, Karen, I could go on and on, Rowan. We had titans from here. And forgive me, I just got to say the next piece. There was a time when the Senate president, the Massachusetts Senate president, was from Holyoke, Mossy Donahue, at the same exact time that the House Speaker was from Holyoke, David Bartley. That's stunning. And not long after that, the minority leader of the Senate, Brian Lees, and the majority leader of the Senate, Linda Melkonian. These two would get in a car, drive to Boston, and probably get more done on that ride in, hammering it out, yelling at each other, fighting with each other, partisan. And yet at the same time, no Melkonian, no Lees, no Basketball Hall of Fame in Springfield, and no Mass Mutual Center. I could go on and on and on. That was a heyday. We kind of need that again. I think the potential's there. Some of these new members, holy smokes, they're just on fire already. And then you've got some that have been there a short time, but who bring these incredible resumes along with them. Joe Comerford, oh my goodness gracious, someone that's known nationally before running for the state Senate. Eric Lesser, holy smokes, goodness gracious. Again, there too, someone who was in the White House, who has I like to call it an old school term, but a platinum Rolodex of contacts across America. Don Vilas, who not just had his time in the House, but this is a guy who spent significant time in Afghanistan, in the United States Army Reserve. This is a fellow who's seen things and done things that are amazing. Hopefully they and Adam Hines and certainly Adam Gomez, are able to come together and really get some amazing things done. But the noise that they've got to make for us in Western Mass, it's a tall order, especially for what they paid.
One of the things too that on the election night, looking at Bill Mullens' old seat, Tom Petrolotti's seat, which he did not run for, when I left that night, Chip Harrington was ahead.
Yeah.
And I looked
Yeah.
at it, I thought, so I went back and I looked, and I couldn't find a time where a Republican held that seat. Then, of course,
Yeah.
we find out the next morning there was a vote counting error in Belchertown, and the
Yeah.
Democrat did win it. I guess there might be a recount there, but again, the names you bring up, and I think
Yeah.
back to those times, Donahue and Bartley, and
Yeah.
what was done here at UMass in those years, and
Bang.
uh,
Absolutely.
so many of the things. It's just,
Yeah.
and all the names that you're mentioning right now, I think of them when it comes for the time where Richie Neal says, "I've had enough and I won't run
Yeah.
again." All of
Yeah.
them.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the key pieces too. Congressman Neal, an incredible track record, a very difficult campaign this last time around. But I think what it all came down to was that folks looked at Neal, looked at the track record, and looked at something else. Chairman of Ways and Means. What does that mean for Western Massachusetts? Not just any time, but especially during this pandemic. He's an insurance policy almost for us at this point. I was joking with somebody the other day, we should take out an insurance policy on him at Lloyd's of London or something, because gosh golly gee whiz, to lose that chairmanship right now would be terrifying in any way, for any reason, act of God, whatever. But, and I'm saying that about somebody who's in better physical shape than I am, frankly, who can probably outrun me by a couple of miles. But it's amazing to see the Neal energy level, and that he's not stopped at all from this freight train mindset that he's got, and in the relationships that he's got on Capitol Hill, both Democratic and Republican. That's the kind of thing you bank on if you're a corporate player in Western Mass. My corporate clients, that's what we look at there. We have faith in a lesser because of the background that he's got. And certainly, too, there are even Republicans that we look at. There's a great, an affinity, certainly, for Governor Baker during this pandemic. And there's a hope that the governor, the Senate president, and the House Speaker are able to do an incredible amount of work as they now go back to work over the next month or 5 weeks or so. There's a lot on the table, Dave, an awful lot.
Let's go back to the presidential race. Without COVID, do you think Donald Trump was reelected?
I think you very may well have been reelected, because the effort and the money and the strategy that was put in by the Trump side of the equation, with the Republican National Committee now being Trump, not being what once was. For him to have pulled off those kinds of numbers, that is amazing. That is absolutely astonishing. It really is. As much as folks are taking shots now at the loser in this race, as the vanquished, at the vanquished player, you've got to take a hard look at that. And over the course of the last few days, I've been saying that to friends on both sides of the aisle in my profession. You've got to have an understanding as to why that happened. Why did so many people, despite all the issues and all the challenges that confronted Donald Trump, still vote for him? Were they specific parochial issues? Was it abortion? Was it the court? Was it guns? Was it any of those, significant third rail type of issues? Was it something else? Was it just their simple belief that perhaps, gosh golly gee whiz, I'm worried about AOC. I'm worried about the Green New Deal. I don't understand it. I don't get the drift of where the new progressive left wants to go. I think the other side of this, perhaps if it had not been Joe Biden running against Donald Trump, I think that as great as some of the other candidates were, Kamala Harris in her own right, Cory Booker in his own right, Elizabeth Warren, my goodness, whose polling was so much stronger than her actual performance. I think ultimately what happened there, Dave, in certain places like South Carolina, even Democrats thought, wait a second, we're going too hard to the left. Not just yet. Some good ideas there. Don't understand them. Don't totally get it. I know we got to do something about climate change, et cetera, and the challenges to our environment, but I'm not ready for that yet. Fix the basics first. So I'm rambling again on that particular answer, but this was the race that had to be Biden up against Trump. COVID notwithstanding, it would have been a heck of a lot tighter race, and more than likely, Trump would have pulled this thing off.
And you mentioned it too. The fact is that when all is said and done, and when Donald Trump accepts the fact that he didn't win the presidency, he's not going anywhere.
He's going to be around. He is a brand. He knows that. And he's always thinking about what's the exit strategy, what's the end game. Right now, I think a lot of the machinations and a lot of the protests that are coming from Donald Trump, from his sons, from certain other players around them, even at the Republican National Committee, which certainly is his Republican National Committee. He owns that RNC more than Ronald Reagan or George H.W. Bush did back in the day. I think what you're hearing from them is setting the stage, realizing they've got 70 million people that voted for him. Mm-hmm. There's still a movement. There's still a cause. He's just got to find some more legitimate folks to say that for him. And he's got to find a more legitimate way himself to speak at it. You know, no, again, disparagement or deference towards the president. Some of this could have been so easy, Dave. And a lot of people gave him a lot of good advice. Just act the role. So sit down and watch a lot of episodes of West Wing and act the same way Martin Sheen does. It's all you got to do is act. For a lot of conservatives who look past Donald Trump's shenanigans or his inappropriateness sometimes as president of the United States, to the unpolished aspect of Trump, some significant conservatives take a look at him and say, my goodness gracious, things were accomplished under Donald Trump for the conservative agenda that not Ronald Reagan, not George H.W. Bush, nor George W. Bush were able to pull off. You know, you look at that, and I'm surprised they didn't campaign a little more strongly and solidly on that. On the other hand, they probably were to get those votes anyway. But when you look at that, the better case and a better campaign could have been made for Donald Trump.
And as we look at that, is how do you think history will remember Donald Trump?
Wow, you're going to see more books about this presidency probably than any other. More books about this movement, what Steve Bannon, what Steve Miller, and some of these other players did. What Roger Stone did yet again, a fellow who's been around since Richard Nixon. I think there will be many, many views of Donald Trump. But certainly, when you've got 70 million followers, that's 70 million, maybe it's 20 million, 30 million of those 70 million who are going to buy that book about Donald Trump, who are going to buy the revisionism that may come as well. So whatever side wins, we always say, be vigilant, always be vigilant. It's not war, it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be government. It's supposed to be coming together for the betterment of America, for the betterment of the electorate. But at the same time, always keep an eye on the opponent, always, constantly. You never know when they're going to come back again.
Tony, let's talk about the Biden cabinet. I mean, there's been so much talk about folks from Massachusetts. I heard Marty Walsh today, of course, Elizabeth Warren. Do you see Joe Biden rating the Senate for many of these positions, just given the fact that he wants to hold on to that the chance of having a Democratic majority?
He can't afford to lose a single senator.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Warren, I think, knows that. But there is a significant group of folks who are saying that she wants this, that she would like to be the Secretary of the Treasury. She would be an interesting pick. I don't think Biden goes in that direction. Sure, just based on the numbers. Even if he doesn't get a Democratic majority in the United States Senate, if it's close, you can't afford to lose one, because Biden's banking on being able to pull a Republican or two or four or five over on this issue or that issue every now and then. So you need all the Democrats. I think what you say to an Elizabeth Warren is, I need you in the Senate. I need you to do this, this, and this for us to help us out. Give me at least 2 years. Let me talk to you again 2 years down the road, Elizabeth. So I think she's the kind of person, too, that's looking at the big picture right now. You can't take anybody out of the United States Senate, Dave. Not a Democrat if you're Joe Biden. Maybe you can entice a Republican or two. I don't know. I don't know of any right now that would actually exit. There had been rumors about Mitt Romney. I don't think so. I think Mitt Romney is running for president in 2024. You know, again, any Sunday morning news show, he was on it. He was everywhere this past weekend. Marty Walsh, an interesting pick. And for Marty, that becomes a situation as you're looking at a tough reelection, possibly a tough reelection, where you've got two city councilors, two very energetic women of color running against him. The initial thought is this one cancel, this vote out a bit, maybe yes, maybe no. But the money that's got to be raised to retain the mayoralty, it's big. He right now is saying not interested, or I haven't been asked, but he's an interesting choice for Biden, if not the mayor of Atlanta, for a position or two in the cabinet. And I think that Biden may be more inclined right now to continue to seek out qualified folks of color for some of these important cabinet positions, especially that have an urban impact within the cities of the United States.
Where do you think Charlie Baker winds up in all of this? Obviously, he said he left his ballot blank. He did not vote for Trump for president. So there's no love lost between at least that faction of the Republican Party and Charlie Baker. Where does he wind up?
I think Charlie Baker is someone who would protest this a bit, but at the same time, I think he's got a taste for politics now. This is someone who ran for governor and lost, and then changed his strategy. Listened to two women, his wife and Karen Polito, changed his running mate, certainly, to go with Karen Polito, and ran in a very different way than he did the first time around. He's learned a lot. Charlie Baker comes across as the guy you'd like to have as your next door neighbor. Yeah. But I think that politically, strategically, there's some Machiavellian flowing through the veins. If there is a rebuilding of the Republican Party, and I think that's still going to have a Trump wing, if there is a look from Republicans at trying to regain the White House in 2024, knowing that the president is not running for re-election, knowing that maybe you're up against a Kamala Harris, but maybe there's other Democrats that are still interested too, then if you're Charlie Baker, you're thinking there's an avenue, there's a path. You're a great running mate for someone, if not the candidate. And sometimes you start as the candidate and wind up the running mate. I may be completely all wet on this, Dave. And if the governor catches this, he'll probably say, Tony, I can't believe you said that. Or I'll hear about it from Karen Polito. But I think this is someone that could be looking at the big sweepstakes. I think Charlie Baker's palatable. We've seen what those polling numbers have been nationally as the nation's most favorite governor for the longest time. I think he just dropped to 2 or 3 at this point recently, but to retain those kind of numbers for all this time, that's certainly something. So I think we're not done with Charlie Baker. I think that there's the other thought too. What if a U.S. Senate seat opens in Massachusetts? You got to wait 6 years for Ed Markey now. You got to wait a while for Elizabeth Warren, 4 years. Well, what if at some point, sometime, things are solid enough, things change, things happen, and Elizabeth exits? Because that's the other thing we know now. She did not protest a lot with the rumors that were out there of becoming Secretary of the Treasury.
Could Baker appoint himself senator?
He could. I don't think he does. It would be foolish to do it for interim until full election. You'd be wasting time because then you'd have to run for it. See, that's the weird thing in Massachusetts too. It almost takes a complete course at Suffolk or Northeastern at this point to figure out. Remember when everybody was worried, Mitt Romney was governor, and there was worry that John Kerry was going to become United States Senator. And what did our legislature do in its infinite wisdom? Created a law that said that the governor could not appoint themselves to the United States Senate. And also we changed up how interim and special elections work. Now there must be a special election. So the governor does appoint an interim senator in an absence, but there will be a special election. That's the law now in Massachusetts. We changed things back to what it was originally. It all depends on who's in power, I guess, and who's worried about who's going to be in the corner office.
Now, you mentioned too that some people are already thinking 2 years ahead to midterm elections, but you mentioned too that, and I think a lot of people assume this, that Joe Biden would be 82 years old when it comes time to run for re-election. How does that play out? Because we know these presidential election cycles now run about 2 years.
Yeah.
Kamala Harris into it. Do we see Cuomo from New York get into this too? So you look at that and go, all right, what happens then?
It depends on retention. The Democrats are going to want to retain the White House. And if for some reason Biden-Harris does not work out well and Harris is tarnished, Harris doesn't perform as we think she might, Harris fumbles, there's a problem. It opens up opportunities. And certainly Andrew Cuomo, who we know pretty well, and I know his dad a lot better than him. Is it on the mind? I think so. Governor of New York looking for the presidency. Will people retain enough about his role and leadership during the pandemic, what he did in New York? Maybe. And if they don't, that's what television ads are for, right? And social media and video. But there'll be other players as well, too, who will be thinking now, gosh, I got to do the right thing. I got to help Joe Biden. It's about America. We got to help the ticket. But if you're Cory Booker, you've had a taste of it. You're thinking about down the road, too. There'll be others. And certainly for Kamala Harris, she has got one heck of a bench to take a look at for vice presidential running mates as possibilities early on.
So we look ahead to the Biden administration now, and my guess is just based on what we're seeing in the uptick in COVID cases that this really is going to dominate the first few months, if not the first year of his presidency.
There's no question about it. This isn't going away tomorrow. Despite the great news from Pfizer, the distribution of the vaccine is a major endeavor. My understanding from several reports yesterday, we're talking about $12 billion minimum. $12 billion already invested to get this to happen the right way. There are so many variables to getting this done right, and that has to be. And you also need, I think, 50 governors working together. So you're going to see, I think, Joe Biden make those first moves and talk to governors that might be normally unpalatable to a Democratic president. Making that call to Governor DeSantis in Florida and saying, put all the stuff aside, how am I getting this vaccine to Floridians who are United States citizens? How am I getting this to everybody in the in your putting aside the boundaries between the states? How do I get this there? How do we do this in Texas? What are we going to do for California? It's the United States, as Biden keeps saying, and in an economic sense, that's essential. We have corporate clients, for an example, in Massachusetts, who depend on the health of our other manufacturing plants in Texas, in Missouri, in Michigan. So it's got to be nationwide that makes this happen. And I think it's one of the things that Biden realizes. It's also an opportunity for Biden to open the door and start having conversations with Republican governors and even with Republican members of the Senate. Here's what I think I can do for your state. Here's what I think I can do to help your electorate, the folks that have elected you, not just deal with the pandemic, but here's what I think we can do on the economy. Here's what I think I can send back to you in stimulus. Here's what I think we can do to start building some roads and bridges. Let's talk about rail, et cetera. That is, I think, the kind of thought you're seeing from a Joe Biden. I don't think he wants to be a pandemic, wartime, long slog, president. I think he's looking for, what can I do? What's that cancer moonshot? What's the Mars piece? What's, all that goes beyond. How do you make America really hope on the big stuff yet again? And at the same time, how do you deal quickly with our standing again around the world?
Tony, there is nothing I enjoy more than talking politics with you.
I think we get it all. My gosh.
I think, and I do look forward to the day where we can do it face to face as opposed to over Zoom. My friend, you've been through and seen so many presidential elections and just different elections. I think as we leave, folks, as we wrap this up, are we going to be okay?
I believe that we will be. One of the amazing things, I've been asked that a lot this year. And again, I get to talk to a lot of folks who are a lot smarter than I am. When you take a look at the fact that the United States of America has spent about $18 trillion a year for over 20 years in encampments, in battles, and in wars in the Middle East, and we still have money on top of that, when you take a look at what we've been through in so many ways, the wealth of this nation is incomprehensible. Some would say, Tony, what did you smoke before doing the show with Dave Madsen? Wait a minute, our deficit, and wait a minute, we're printing money. But you look at all the rest of it, Dave, we're still it. That China has not passed us yet at this point, given the kind of radical expenditures that we've got that we're involved in, we're going to be okay. We're going to get through this. We still have that thing. We may not, the greatest generation rate right now may not look like the greatest generation of 75 years ago. But there are a lot of young people out there that are like your dad, that get it done, that, this is what it's about. America, family, what do we need to do to keep this incredible experiment that is America, this republic alive? It's interesting to see, especially when I look at the young people that voted, and not just Democrats, young Republicans, young independents and unenrolled who may have voted either way. I'm looking at those numbers now, Dave, and that's the biggest thing. It's mind-boggling to me. And I think that's a great thing that many came out to vote, whether they voted for Biden or for Trump, whether they voted for Collins or Gideon, et cetera. They came out. I think they've got a taste of this now, Dave. They've got a taste of the campaign, of politics. They understand what government means. I think we're going to be okay because of that, because those kids aren't going away. Eventually, you and I will be going away, but they're coming. This is amazing, that they're in the game right now. They're making a difference.
Tony and I could have talked another hour. about politics around the country and here in Western Mass. So many things to talk about, and I can't thank Tony enough for taking the time to be with me. He, as you might understand, has been very busy these days with everything that's going on around the country and here at home. So thank you for watching or listening to this week's edition of the Even Better Western Mass podcast. Wherever you are, stay well, stay healthy, and hopefully you'll join us next week.